was the first battle of World War II, which was actually done on Japanese soil, where most of the Pacific campaign was retaking islands that the Japanese had taken. This was the first island that was theirs. So it was an interesting time, an interesting project, and then I became interested very much in General Kurabayashi, who defended the island as well, so I ended up doing 2 pictures, one on the flags of our fathers and another one that we wrote from scratch.
Well, we were researching flags of our fathers and coming across a lot of material about sort of the defense of the island, and Clint came in one day and said that he had just spoken to Stephen, and he had this idea of maybe doing a companion piece, something that focused on the Japanese side of things, and that Stephen really liked the idea. And he said to me he thought maybe we could shoot it at the same time.
If he gets here, if he almost leans out over it,
and then that gets me to come down, and then your body comes over.
It was fascinating, so I was just wondering who the tactician was on the other side, and what their mentality was, and what their feelings were. And Americans were sent into the South Pacific in the war knowing that they were, hoping that they were going to come back, knowing it was going to be tough sledding, but they were, everybody goes hoping you're going to come back. In the case of the Japanese, they were told they weren't coming back. So it's a different mentality. I'm not sure that's a mentality we would have been able to handle ourselves, but anyway, that's the way they approached it. So that made another movie out of it, a whole other story, which I didn't want to cross-collateralize with flags, trying to tell 2 stories in the same movie, which has been done before, but it's very difficult to do successfully. So I just decided to make a whole other movie of it.
Clint called me. I was writing Flags of Our Fathers for him. He called me and said, well, I think we should do this story from the other side. I went, you're out of your mind. What's my response? He said, no, I think it'd be really good. And I've got this book of letters I heard about. We're going to get translated. And so he sent it to me, and it was a book of letters, very thin, written in Japanese. And it was from a general who was in charge of the island, but it was in the 30s, the 20s and the 30s. It had nothing to do with Iwo Jima. It was 15 years before Iwo Jima. But it really piqued Clint's interest.
Okay, action. Everybody, action.
But I didn't feel qualified to write the screenplay. I thought we needed to find a Japanese writer or a Japanese-American writer, ideally a Japanese writer. Couldn't find a Japanese writer that was in America and who spoke English. Found some good ones in Japan. It was a small budget movie. We couldn't go over there to find them, so I started looking for a Japanese-American writer, and I found Iris.
My agency is the same as Paul's agency, and so my agent heard that they were looking for a writer and submitted my scripts, but we really didn't think that we had a chance because I hadn't had anything produced before this. But Paul he really liked the scripts that he read and called me in for a meeting. And I had already prepared a bunch of research on this, and I had some ideas for characters, and I presented them to Paul. And he just really responded to it, and he just thought that I was going in the right direction. And at the second meeting, he basically told me that I was hired.
When the bad guys come over the hill, those bad guys are the Americans in this story we're telling. And you really have to empathize with people who would be villains in other films and tell them from their perspectives, because we wanted to show from the beginning is there were many perspectives. There were as many perspectives on the Japanese side as there were on the American side, and we wanted to show that, and Iris found 2 or 3 storylines that would help illustrate that.
I wanted to make sure that I did all the research and to try to make it as authentic as possible and to draw from a lot of actual experiences. And then I just did a lot of research on personal accounts of soldiers. I couldn't find very many for Iwo Jima because there were not many survivors. I think I found a couple. So I started looking at accounts from other battles.
We tried to do everything historically true as much as possible. Everything is told secondhand to us. Everything has been written by people who probably weren't there. Some of them were there, but stories told to them by people who were there, who see the war through different eyes. Some of them seeing it from having 60 years to cogitate on it. So you have to kind of go and have to develop your own image of it.
He'll take 2 steps. Boom, 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 boom.
Hey, Pete, so everybody in that area.
2 or 3 of the characters, the larger characters, are fictionalized, but we knew at that point in the war that they were sending men to war who they wouldn't have sent 2 or 3 years ago, and so they were guys who were 35 years old or 40 years old, or young men, 15, 16-year-olds or younger, were being sort of swept off the street and sent. So we knew the type of people that we wanted to use in the story.
I was born in the U.S. I was born in Missouri, and I grew up in Hawaii. My parents are Japanese, so I'm a Nisei, and I did go to Japanese school when I was in elementary school, but I probably have maybe like a 3rd grade level of Japanese reading and writing ability. So I wrote the script completely in English, and they had a translator from the studio translated, and then I think Ken Watanabe had a couple of translators that he picked to also translate the script. He was very concerned about making sure that it was accurate for the time.
Then he just gets up and he has to take a swing. So he gets up there and he gets hit. And we'll cut to you, cut a shot, Boom, he falls down. Look.
It was an interesting challenge to do a picture where you don't know what anybody's saying. I mean, you know what they're saying because you know what the story's about, you know the script backwards and forwards, but when all of a sudden people start talking in a language that you're not really that familiar with, or you're not fluent in, it's interesting. It's great. I mean, I loved it. It was a great challenge, but it's different.
Clint had worked with James Murakami before. He had been the art director on Unforgiven, and then when we worked on Space Cowboys, he also participated in the art direction on that as well. And we remembered him very well.
I received a call from Rob Lawrence, and he said, "Would you be interested?" I said, "Well, what type of film is it?" And he said, "Well, it's a Japanese language film." So all of a sudden it perked me up. I said, "Well, maybe, I'd like to work on it." But I said, "You know what, following Bummy's footstep would be a big shoe to fill," so I kind of was hesitant about it. But Bummy came on, I was very happy, and we sat down and collaborated. Went to his house a few times, and that's where it started. We were shooting Iwo Jima at Malibu, but I was very fortunate to be able to go to Iwo Jima for one day, and it was mainly to see if there are any shots that didn't work at Malibu, which would have been very difficult because they said we couldn't dig any hole on any beach at that time where the attack took place. We couldn't because it was very sacred now, and it was quite an experience for me to go down into some of the caves and see firsthand, and where you can just imagine the people down there where it's hot and steamy, and then near the end with lack of food, and they were eating bugs and foraging out to get water, and that's when it was very dangerous because they had to actually leave their caves. So to me it tells a story about the suffering and where both sides suffered, and I think 27,000 people died on the island. So it was an emotional thing for me because my ancestors came from Japan and raised here, and my father being Japanese and it was Shinto, and my mother was born here, so I was caught between two cultures, and I was raised that way. So that's why it interested me, see that aspect of the war, that happened. But they did go back post-production, shot some of the excavation scenes prior to it going into the tunnels, and then they shot the new monument that's there on top of Suribachi. This was a research that I found in a Japanese magazine that I bought like almost 40 years ago, and I never even opened it up. And there was this photo that was sort of the start of our Motoyama village in Iwo Jima. So we started from this, and we started drawing the village, and then we had to take that village and convert it into the Tokyo suburbs, which was very difficult because we only had one day to convert it into Tokyo, so it was almost impossible. So we ended up with this plan, which we would shoot into the T, which would be this way, as Motoyama, and when we got into the Tokyo street, we would shoot from the upper part of the street. That way, all we had to do was revamp or take parts of the facade off, which already had Tokyo under it. So it worked out real well.
Action!
We had a lot of books that we used, Japanese uniform books that dated from 1931 to 1945. We looked at those. We had a lot of actual photographs that we had seen, things on the internet, things from collectors, military collectors. We tried to make it as accurate as possible. And, a lot of actors come to me, and this is the way they find their characters, sometimes through the clothes. And especially with the different characters in this movie, I try to make them each a little bit different to fit their personalities, even though you don't have that much creativity with a uniform because there's only so many pieces to do that with. Also, in a war movie, sometimes it's confusing because with all the action that's going on, you don't know who's who with the helmets, and I just wanted to make sure that each one had their own personality, especially with Saigo, because he didn't want to be there, so he looked almost childlike in a way, and that followed through with the other characters as well. Shimizu was a Kempitai, so he was almost like what we consider a military police. And he looked very straight and kind of stiff, so we made sure that his clothes always appeared that way. His uniform was always buttoned up, and he was very put together all the time. This is Kurabayashi. He's at Harvard University, and he's actually in the movie. He's doing sketches of the traffic jam that's in front of him. The clothes that I made for him are nice wool fabrics. The 20s, it was a 20 overcoat with the long sleek, and it's fitted at the waist, and then a suit of that period as well, and a Homburg. This is Kurabayashi in 1929, and it was at a dinner party for officers. And this is a Japanese cavalry uniform, and you can see on the sleeves the bullion work and on the collar, and the green wool signifies cavalry. And the uniform was made out of actually a dark blue, almost like a midnight blue wool. This is Hanako. This is Saigo's wife, and she's pregnant. She's about 6 months pregnant, and she has her apron over a kimono. We know kimonos many times as being silk, and because the war was happening, they were not allowed to wear silk kimonos because it was disrespectful. So at that time, they wore kimonos that were kind of plain, and because there was no money as well because of the war.
They were two films that actually, there's like a doppelganger kind of thing, and they reinforce each other. And to me, the experience is sort of most interesting when you see the two together, because it really gives you the totality of the event. And so it seemed that they should relate, in a sense, sort of harmonically. And so visually we did that palette-wise. And I came up with the idea that it was a noble journey to oblivion. And I guess that's how I approached it, was that the idea of nobility through this, that these characters under incredible duress had a nobility about them.
I only read a script one time, and it's like a map. And I always say that to people, but it's like a map of where we're going. And as you take that trip, the actors do different things with the characters than it's written, the director's got a different idea. So you just take each scene that you edit, and you edit that scene to be the best it can be, and then you start formulating the picture by putting the scenes together. And I thought it was very similar to the editing of any film. Remember, I have a script in English, so I'm look at the script for the language of what he's saying, and I figured from that where I thought I wanted to make the edit across to maybe get a reaction to what they're saying, and so I tried to figure where they were saying that in the Japanese language. Performance is not just speaking the dialogue, but it's also your movements, your reaction. I look in their eyes, and we actually edited that film, and it was about 2 hours and 50 some odd minutes in the first cut. And when we got down to 2 hours and 26 minutes, we brought one of the interpreters in, and they went through the film, and there were 4 words to fix. And Rob stood up and says, "I am impressed."
This is kind of a nice shot. Yeah, the opening, yeah. This opening here. Okay, and set. Come ahead. Background.
People are going to see a war from an American director on opposite side of a story of what these soldiers were up against and what they went through to try to survive and defend their country. And I think that that's something that's never been done before. And I'm certainly has done where one director has back-to-back done a film on both sides of a war.
He'll just rise right up with you and point it right in the camera and just boom.
Clint approaches everything with such confidence that it's contagious. He's been around so long, he's done so much. There's nothing that really scares him. So the idea of doing a film in Japanese, in a foreign language, set in a foreign country, is not something that scared him, and therefore it didn't concern us. We knew that if he got through it, we'd get through it.
My parents are from Japan, and my mother was actually, when she was a little kid in Japan, her house was burned down during a fire raid over Tokyo. And after I thought about it, the fire raid actually took place right around the time that Iwo Jima was falling. So it was a major fire raid too that burned Tokyo to the ground. There were like 100,000 people who died during that one fire raid. And so thinking about that, and then thinking about the soldiers who are trying to prevent that on the island, it does have sort of a personal note for me.
I met with the men who were on the Iwo Jima Association, which is an association of veterans who would include the son of Baron Nishi, who was on the island, died on the island, and the grandson of General Kuribayashi, and so there's a lot of relatives who are interested in the stories, and I think they thought it was rather odd that an American wants to come and do a story on a Japanese general and all that, but now that many decades have gone by, I think it was important for the Japanese public to appreciate the men, even though it's not about winning or losing the war, who won or who lost. It's just about the sacrifices they made for their country, rightly or wrongly, they made them.